So this is the last message on rest for this little series. In looking at it in retrospect, we talked about Sabbath, we talked about, just the way that God ordained for us to have a set time to rest, and about the necessity of that. We went over the reality of our needs in that place, and our need to take care of ourselves, our need to recuperate. We talked about trust, and the trust that we need to have in God in order to even be able to really rest. Because the truth is that most of our rest is found in Him. Most of it. And that in so many ways it's really difficult to really be able to take a break from duties or life circumstances or so many things when you can't believe in the person, in the being who sits over you and is supposed to be providing for you and taking care of you. If you can't believe in that, then how are you supposed to be able to stop working for a season and be able to be okay, unemployed, or in so many, or being at another person's home or something like that. There are so many places that He might call us to live in for a while that are so far from what's socially acceptable or socially normal. And it's really difficult for us, But we have to be able to trust Him in those places. And last week we talked about rest as a concept in and of itself, the way that rest is like an affront to the enemy. This place where God calls us into this rest, and how it's actually a very active thing that we do. It's not a passive thing. It's not just going to bed at night. It's literally finding the peace and the place to just stand and be okay in the face of everything that life is throwing at you and everything that the enemy is doing to try to break you down. And to conclude this message, there was one story that I was given to look at, and I think in some ways it summarizes the whole of this message in a way, or the whole of this series. But it's the story of Elijah when he went out to the desert and rested. It's in 1 Kings 19. We'll read through that, but just to give a context to it. This comes after the story that we all know about Elijah, where he went up and he had the prophets of Baal create their own altar, and he created one to God. And basically there was this whole ordeal that happened in which, Elijah was asking, the prophets of Baal to, call down fire from heaven to eat up their altar, their sacrifice. And it became this big hoopla where the prophets of Baal are dancing around and cutting themselves, and Elijah's over there just I don't think he can hear you. So maybe you're just going to have to work harder. What ends up happening is that, and Elijah, of course, he went to his altar, he threw water over the sacrifice just to make sure it was harder to burn. And when it came down to it, God took the offering that was given to him, he sent fire from heaven and just ate up the entire thing. And then he ate the one for the prophets of Baal too. And the prophets of Baal ended up being taken aside from and slaughtered as false prophets. And in many ways that was under Elijah's guise. I want you guys to take a minute to really think about the perspective that Elijah had at that moment, where he had seen he had been the fulcrum for this incredible move of God, where God revealed himself to all these people and revealed the falseness to this other God that these people believed in so wholeheartedly. I mean, this is a pretty intense thing, and then to watch fire come down from heaven and destroy this water-soaked altar and the sacrifice on it, it's pretty intense. I mean, when you think about it, that's a hard thing to stand back and say, oh, I don't know if God's real anymore. And yet, we get to 1 Kings 19, which is the chapter that falls directly after that story. And Ahab, the king of Israel at that time, or Judah at that time, had been there to watch this happen. And it starts off with, now Ahab told Jezebel, his wife, who was, pushing for so many of these other gods to be worshipped in Israel. So Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a message to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there while he himself went a day's journey into the desert. He came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. "I've had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under the tree and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was a cake of bread baked over hot coals in a jar of water. He ate and drank and then laid down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank, strengthened by that food. He traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. And the word of the Lord came to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I've been very zealous for the Lord, God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too." The Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the quake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He replied, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too." The Lord said to him, "Go back the way you came and go to the desert of Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael king over Aram. Also anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel, and anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, from Abel, Meholah, to succeed you as a prophet. Jehu will put to death any who escape the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death any who escape the sword of Jehu. Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal, and all whose mouths have not kissed him." So, pertinence of this story is it illustrates an instance where one of the great men of God, who we look at so much and revere so much, he came from this incredible experience where he got to really see the power of God manifest. And then he turned around, and the moment that his life was threatened, he ran away. He didn't have any belief, any trust that God was going to protect him. Instead, he panicked and bailed. And then he hid out in the desert and wanted to die. Inevitably, his body gave out on him, because you can't be under that much duress for that long without eventually, succumbing. And when he did, God sent an angel to watch over him, to feed him, to prep him for the next thing. And the next thing was something significant. And even the way that God came to him, to speak to him in that cave when he went up on the mountain, was not booming or destructive or scary. It was quiet. And it was purely this question of, why are you here? Why'd you run away? See, the thing of it is that we don't appreciate the reality that rest is a necessity. This isn't about this isn't a question of, I'll do it when I feel like it's time, or I'll do it when I'm given the time. We have to take the time. Because our body's going to need it one way or the other. One of the most supremely frustrating and difficult things to witness over and over and over again, and I've seen this with church leaders over and over and over again, is it seems like every new convert, or every person who gets filled with the Spirit, they immediately rush out and start running themselves into the ground, trying to do stuff for Jesus. And it wears them, and it wears them, and it wears them down, because it's a grind. And the reality is that working with the church is not fun, it's not easy, it's not enjoyable. It's a lot of scrubbing toilets, for lack of a better analogy. And so they get ground down. Like, you can only handle so many people dumping their issues on you. It doesn't matter what kind of, shepherd's heart you have that just wants to protect and take care of and nurture. It will wear you down. Which means we have to be willing to take time to rest our bodies and our minds and our spirits. Otherwise, we wind up with, like Elijah here, who has this incredible experience and then runs away because he's afraid. You start losing the ability to be rational, and what's more is you start losing the ability to be met by God. After this happens, he goes out and does everything that God asked him to do. But he had to be met by God in this place of resting and recuperating. He had to be restored before he could go do it. And the thing with rest is, it's necessary, it's good, and sometimes we can't choose it, we have to do it. And I guess to kind of explain that a little bit, because it sounds almost redundant, is that we need to make time for rest, because if we don't, our bodies will. And as I was saying with those ministers, for some of them, they get worn down and they just lose their passion. Then you run into the other ones, the really hardcore ones, the ones who just pour themselves into God over and over and over again, the ones who could be best described the way that Paul describes himself, as being a drink offering poured out for all. And you know what happens with those guys? They don't rest. And it means that when they finally break down, because they always do, something happens that forces them to do it. I can think of one guy off the top of my head who got into a car accident, and that forced him to step down from a leadership position and into a resting position. And I can think of a number of other people who, I mean, even Heather, my wife, like so much of what she's been through, she's dealing with the repercussions of a lifetime spent pouring herself out for God and for other people, and never taking the time to recuperate from it. And this is the problem, is that for those really hardcore ones, like, there are a lot of like the new converts, and then they just get worn down and maybe don't stay Christians after a while. But then you have the other ones that do push through and fight and fight and fight, and when they have to stop, they start having to face the reality of how much trauma they've endured. And that rest season, it doesn't feel like rest. It feels like war. Because they don't know what it is to recuperate. Everything in them feels like they need to still be out fighting. But instead they're being healed of damage. And that's hard. And what's more is it sets us at odds with God, because suddenly we think that we're supposed to be doing these things, and He's telling us not to. He's not creating the space for us to do those things. Like, we can make it up. A lot of people do. They'll make up a new group, or they'll make up a new church thing, or whatever, a new ministry, in order to continue pressing forward, but it just ends up in shambles. See, we need to take time to rest. Because rest is the thing that bridges us going from one thing to the next. See, in this story, Elijah needed that time to rest because he went from this incredible experience in being God's prophet to the nation of Israel, to then being one who rose up another great prophet in Elisha and anointing kings in order to see God's will done in Israel. Oftentimes the only way that we can go from point A to point B is if we take a break in between stepping forward from one point to the other. Because at the end of the day, I don't think there's one more poignant statement to kind of conclude this message, but also to express the basic necessity of it, than the statement made by the angel when he came the second time. Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. Take care of yourself, because you can't do this without doing that. I know that I personally have had to experience this a few different times. Like, even before we started this group, years ago, I had to spend almost a year taking a break from doing any form of ministry work whatsoever, because I was just too run down from everything. And it felt bad. And the truth is like it felt bad because, for one thing, I wasn't doing anything for God, and I felt like I was supposed to be. For the other thing, I felt really bitter at God because of everything that I'd endured with my time working in the church. I needed that time to have Him minister to me and preach to me and show me who He was again. Because the truth is, sometimes we forget, especially when we're caught up in the mess and the warfare of everything. And the final thing that, we're supposed to talk about with this message, with this series, is how do we rest? And how we rest is we just trust in God.
Literally that simple.
Yeah, not really. Yeah. That's a portion of it. But let's be realistic about what things look like. Okay? We have a lot of times where what we run through is we don't feel like God's there. We have a lot of times where we're caught in the midst of all the war and stuff like that. I mean, we literally just spent like 2 months talking about spiritual warfare. In the midst of spiritual warfare and the constant mess that is, a lot of us, we don't see God, okay? Like, we'll get caught up in whatever the enemy's doing, or we'll get caught up in the people being used against us. Like, there's so much mess that happens. I mean, there are so many distractions in this room right now. So how do you rest in the midst of that? Is it really just as simple as trusting God? Well, yes and no. Like, being able to trust in God is a portion of it. That's why there was a whole message in this series devoted to that particular thing. Knowing that God wants to take care of you. And there are a lot of times where we have to stand on that knowledge because it doesn't feel like that's true. And the thing of it is that's annoying is that in so many ways when we run into those feelings and we kind of function off those, and we'll even like get frustrated and respond, like we'll get mad at God, which is, by the way, something he wants. Like, by all means, share your feelings with him because he wants to dialogue with you. But the really annoying thing about that is it feels like such a trap, because it's just like you share how angry you are, and then he reveals how he's actually been there the whole time, and you find yourself having to face that, oh, he's enlightening you to where he's been there for you, and you just haven't felt it or appreciated it. But it's not a trap, it's part of just venting those emotions and feelings and even inviting him into that. And that's even part of finding rest, is because, like, the longer that you hold on to that stuff, the harder, like, it's like this thing of, like, putting a lid on, like, a boiling cauldron. The water's still boiling. The pressure's still building. And it won't be released until you lift that cauldron, otherwise it's just going to boil over. There's no rest in that image, is there? Like, that's not comfortable, that's not peaceful, that's a looming explosion. Which is actually a part of how we rest, and how we make time in rest, and how we do this, is being realistic about what we feel and even expressing and releasing those pent-up emotions. Because God, we need to understand, is not going to be hurt by our feelings. He knows when it's just raw emotion versus a logical, thought-out thing. And the truth is that a lot of people, like, we struggle more, I would argue that people struggle more with emotions than realities of any kind. Because a lot of emotions can come from places that aren't quite real. It's just our perception. And that's coloring how we feel about things. And a lot of times God has to help us work through that. So this is actually a portion of how we physically choose to make time to rest. The other time is to make time. Like, it doesn't matter how busy you are, how many things that you have, there is an opportunity to always make the time to stop and just rest. And a lot of people don't want to do that. Because the truth is again, like we talked about with the beginning of this series, like this was going to be a small group. This was not going to be a lot of people watching these videos, or even being part of this message. Part of that was because of Christmas. The other part of it was because nobody really values the subject. It's intrinsic, incredibly valuable, incredibly important to our very existence as people and Christians, but no one cares. Because we're more about doing stuff. Which is ironic, because a lot of the problems in the world are created by people just doing stuff because they feel like they're supposed to or want to.
Yeah.
Instead of being thoughtful or stepping outside of themselves. Nobody rests long enough to recuperate and get a fresh head on their shoulders. Instead, they just kind of keep doing stuff until they crash and burn. And drink themselves to death. Exactly, Dusty. You know this all too well. We've all seen it happen.
Doesn't it feel good just to let that go?
Like what go?
Just let it go. It felt good, didn't it? I can't. Are you sure? Do it.
One can only hope that wasn't picked up on the microphone. Anyway, so speaking of how, one thing is to take, the first and most important thing is going to be taking the time. And that doesn't matter, like, what it looks like. Whether it's a moment in your car before you head home from work or head home from the gym or whatever, maybe it's time at the gym, like you used to do. Maybe it's you go on a hike, maybe it's you go on a walk. Maybe it's you go on a drive. Maybe it's literally just turning on YouTube and vegging for like 2 hours. It's a funny thing because like the way that we rest, the point of resting is to recuperate. And there's a twofold element to this, where it's like, for one thing it's for ourselves, for the other thing it's for us and God. To create an opportunity for Him to reach us and touch us, touch our hearts, in the midst of this time. It's also time for us to just be okay and kind of regenerate everything, which means just sitting down, laying down, relaxing, not doing stuff. And the funny thing about that is, like, there are some people who, like Stephanie talked about when we talked about rest a couple nights ago or something like that. Maybe it was on the night when we talked about Sabbath. But she talked about how she actually gets a lot of, like, rest out of cleaning things. Like, she'll clean her house and she feels really rested after that. And that's actually, there's a psychology to that. Because there are a lot of people who struggle with, like, the clutter of things. And that makes them feel uneasy, so if they bring an order to that, then they're okay. But there's a danger in that. So when it comes down to, like, making time with God, that's its own thing. The truth is what matters is that you're talking to Him. You're resting with Him. And maybe that doesn't even mean that you're having a conversation. Maybe that just means you're putting on worship music and just singing. But it just means that you have time that you're spending in His presence and letting Him take care of you, minister to you, speak to you. Maybe you read the Bible for a certain amount of time and that's how you rest. But it really is but in any of these kinds of things, it's really going to boil down to what works for you, because everybody's different. And the truth is that one of the hard things about this is that there's no how-to, in the sense of, well, you do these things and then you will rest, because the truth is people are different. So like for myself, if I go on a hike, that's very restful for me. That's one way that I will try to spend my rest days. If I'm honest, or completely open, I should say, just laying down and cuddling my wife for a long time. That helps me rest. Other people have different things. Some people like to do crafts, like Heather. One thing that she finds rest in is just doing little crafts and putting those together. So there's this thing, whereas other people, it might be that you find your rest by literally just locking yourself in your room and not being around people or things of any kind. Maybe that's what's most restful for you. Maybe. And see, there is a sort of trial and error that has to come up, and that's okay, because you're never going to just know how to get it right the first time. When God first started talking to me about resting, and valuing that, and taking a day of rest to recuperate from the week, because the week had enough pressure in and of itself to kill me. But I had to go through a period of learning what worked and what didn't, and also learning the value of it. Because we always want to make, exceptions. We have that one, stressful friend, and we think that, oh, well, we're just going to hang out with them. It's going to be okay, because they're my friend. And then you go hang out with them, and holy crap, they just drive you insane. Or they make you feel anxious or stressed or any number of things, and they don't actually contribute to your resting. Or maybe it's your parents. They are infamous for this. In a lot of people, where spending time with your family or your parents, especially your parents, will actually inspire more anxiety. Especially when you have an issue with being a people pleaser. That's a big deal, because if you find yourself around peers, oftentimes it'll inspire that sort of anxiety. And as such, you can't rest in their midst. All you can do is feel that constant chaos inside of you, and then when you walk away from your day of rest, you find yourself still feeling stressed and uncomfortable and not really sure what to do and anxious. Well, when you find yourself dealing with that particular set of feelings, you find that that's probably not a person you should hang out with, or a group of people you should hang out with on your days of rest. And I had to learn this firsthand, because I didn't get that. I was constantly sacrificing my rest days in order to go satisfy the needs of people around me. My mom needed help with this friend needed help with this. And I had to learn to say no and just let them deal with themselves, or put it off until the next day. So there was this thing of having to learn how to just sit back and be okay, no, I'm not going to help you with this today. If you want to go do it tomorrow, I'll help you then, but until then, leave me alone. And in many cases, I had to be that abrupt, because at the end of the day, it came down to needing to let myself be taken care of, as opposed to taking care of everybody else, and that's not an easy thing to do. In fact, a lot of people would hear this and almost think it's like heresy. Well, you can't think of yourself above others. It's you can, when all you're going to do is end up stressing yourself to a point of delusion. And this is the thing, is we talked about before. When stressors become a problem, they can wear you down and cause you to make poor decisions in trying to take care of other people. It'll wear you down, so you're not hearing God, you're just hearing your own emotions or your own chaos. I mean, it's what anxiety orders are infamous for doing, is they sit us in this place of constant chaos, and we can't think straight. All we can do is be afraid, or be hit by whatever's motivating the self-preservation instincts. We just get rickrolled by that over and over and over again. and then move in accordance with that and do stuff in accordance with that. People pleasing is a fine example, because a lot of the reason for why those like pastors and new Christians do their thing is because they have people pleasing issues and they want to please God. And they just project that onto him. And he might be saying, hey, you need to sit down. And they're saying, no, I need to go do stuff for you. Anyway, so valuing this day and looking at who you're hanging out with and even what you're doing is going to be an important thing, because it'll determine whether or not you actually find yourself rested after that day or after that time period that you spend just trying to recuperate. I mean, like, at the end of the day, the premise of this series is to try to inspire people to, hey, take a Sabbath day. It doesn't matter what you have going on in life. It doesn't matter what your circumstance is. Please pick a day, hold on to it, and make it your day to rest and recuperate. It's understood that that's an ideal, and that many probably won't, but that's still the aim. So then, in taking your day, understand that it is for your own good, understand that it's important for you, that it will help you deal with the rest of the weeks and help you recover from what you've had happen over the course of the week so far. And even if you've had like a relaxed week, there's nothing wrong with having another nice relaxed day in the midst of it. That's not wrong or evil or anything like that. But when it comes down to like picking those activities, because like I was saying, we have an issue with, we have to do kind of a trial and error, kind of like with people where, even though they're a friend, they actually stress us out, or we have that friend who actually makes us feel more comfortable. That's a good one to hang out with on your rest day. But activities are another thing, and activities have this really dangerous thing where they can create a false positive. So, like, we have to be able to overcome, or we have to be able to delineate between a feeling of accomplishment and a feeling of rest. Because, see, sometimes, like, talking about the people that find rest in, like, organizing or doing things like that, or cleaning even. There are some people who that is restful for them. There are other people who, when they do it, they feel like they accomplished something. And because they feel good about it, they think that it's a restful thing, when in reality it just stressed their body out more. Hi, Steph.
Hey.
No,
Is anybody's in here?
no, fine.
I don't want to be in the video.
No one ever wants to be seen with me.
Over there now.
Oh. Anyway, we were just talking about like kind of the how-tos of rest. Yeah. So like, basically it was just like going down what I've shared so far is, the ideal here is for everybody, regardless of what your circumstance is, regardless of what you've got going on in life. The ideal here is that everyone will take a day in their week as a rest day, as a Sabbath day. And it's understood that that's an ideal, but it's still like, that's the aim of this series, is just, hey, take one day, just one day out of your week, and hold that as your day to rest. And the other thing that I was sharing here was just about how, in the face of that, consider who you hang out with on that day. Because there are some people that'll drain you, there are other people who will build you up. You don't want to. Yeah. Yeah. Families tend to be a dream. They can be. But if you know, friends can be that as well. And just, be cautious of who you spend your time with. And there's always like a trial and error thing, where it's like we kind of have to learn this the hard way sometimes, that, okay, this friend, even though we're really close, actually makes me feel more drained after hanging out with them. And that's not to say stop hanging out with them, it's just not on the day when it's for you to recuperate. And then the other thing, and this actually translates to friends as well, but when you're doing like things, if you decide to go out and do something on your day, because some people feel recharged by going out and doing stuff. Like I was talking about how I like to go hiking. That's a way that I feel recharged. But like there is this thing where we have to be careful that we don't like fall into creating false positives for that. Because sometimes what we run into is like there are some people who for their rest periods, they will find themselves feeling more rested after they've cleaned their house. There are other people who will feel a sense of accomplishment from cleaning their house, when in reality it stressed them out the whole time and drained them of more energy. So we kind of have to like figure out and be careful of what we're drawing from that.
Right.
And in the same way, friends can actually have the same effect, where if you're the kind of person who likes to go help people, you have to be careful that that feeling of accomplishment or that feeling of doing good isn't covering or eclipsing how it's actually draining you to do this. And that ends up being such a big thing, is like, you don't want to stress yourself or push yourself too hard. Another thing that I've personally run into is like creating what I refer to as no-fail goals. They're the kinds of things where it's like, on your day to rest, you can set goals for yourself that don't matter. Like little small things that if you don't make them, you don't feel bad about it, because they don't actually make a difference. Or even, whereas if you actually make it to doing them, you feel a little bit of accomplishment. Like it feels good. And it might be a fun thing to do. Like even using hiking as the example, on my days of rest, like I'll set hiking as like my thing to go do. But I also don't like get caught up on it. If I don't get out there, that's okay. I might just need to like chill out and sit around and veg all day. It really just is kind of like as the feelings go. You okay with it, Jeremy?
Yeah.
Okay. So there are those things. And those are for like the personal side of it. We also talked about like the God side of it, where our rest days, there should be a portion where we give him a little bit of time to just let him reach us and share with us. Another how-to is to go to places that you feel comfortable. And like we talked about, like driving can be like a source of stress. And how for some people on their day of rest, it's probably better they just don't hop in the car. Or like, you be careful of where you go in your car. Don't use it as a day to fulfill errands if you can avoid that. Like I've had a few times where like my rest day had to become like a laundry day or something like that. It's okay. It's just that, the hope is to do that ahead of time. But even in that, like, it goes back to that point that a lot of us, we try to, when we have days off, we try to fill them with things that we need to go do. That's not always conducive to feeling good afterwards or feeling rejuvenated. Sometimes it's better to just, a lot of the time, it's better just to have a day that's devoted to doing things that you like to do. Crafts, hikes, walks, movies, whatever it is. And just discovering, what best helps you recuperate. The other thing is to be, and I know I already kind of said this, but to be protective over that day. Like, again, it's for your own sake, and also for the sake of your relationship with God. It is a big deal. A lot of us don't value this rest thing, like we don't. But the more involved that you are with, like, work or school, church, whatever it is, the more you find yourself needing a break, right? Well, then take the break and enjoy that break. That way, when you come back to it, it's even like in the school thing in particular. I always remember that I was taught a thing where it's like important every couple of hours to take a 15-minute break at least from the work that you're doing. That was when I was in college. I remember being taught that. But it allows you, because like sometimes you'll run into those problems that are really hard, or how you just can't find the words to do that, to write in that paper. And it's really frustrating because you'll sit there and you'll fight and you'll fight and you'll fight and you'll fight and you'll hold on to it and you'll try to like put it together, you'll try and try and try, and finally when you give up and walk away for a minute, you come back and it's like it just comes right to you.
Right.
Well, being aware of that means that maybe we can just avoid the whole uncomfortable, stubborn part of like the fighting and just kind of go straight to the, okay, I'm not getting this right now, I need to take a break. They've been threatening violence at each other through most of the course of the video.
Oh, okay.
It's how we relax.
Dusty throws avocado pits, Jeremy gets hit in the face with them, they both feel better about it. Yeah.
We didn't cuss at all, though.
Not on this video. Anyway. But that's what I've got. I mean, like, unfortunately, like I said, there isn't like a specific like how-to step thing. Like, it's pretty general, and it is going to be different for every person. And we're going to have to learn like what's best for us to grow in this way, and to develop this tool, to exercise this ability to rest. But I can say for sure, like from personal experience, like it is a really good thing. And it'll help when you have like so many things going on during the week, especially the more stressful life and circumstances. You'll feel it when you don't get that day of rest versus when you do get that day of rest. And just how much easier it is to handle what life's throwing at you over the course of the rest of the week. Not only having had that time to just be okay, to chill, to calm down, but also when you've had that, like knowing that that's on the horizon. Sometimes like a week can be hard, and it's like knowing that your day of rest is coming up. It's just like that, I'll be okay. It can be an encouragement that way. that's about what I have for this.